A subject that, for me, I would very much like to share, both in remembrance and in knowing and appreciating my life. When you know and appreciate a life, you're not looking for agreement or support or disagreement or disdain. I'm looking to share a very important part of my life merely because that was Alan Brown. Because of my father, at the university, what I majored in, even what grades I got, how well I did, what was important to my father was that I was at the university and that I would promise him that I would work and do everything I could to achieve a commission, an officer's commission in the armed services. He had no preference between Navy, Army, Air Force. He merely clearly expected me and asked in every way, including the way, to promise that's what I would do. So when at the University of Utah, I was approaching my junior year, I became affiliated with the Air Force Royal Reserve Officers Training Corps. Flying airplanes had been my thought process, my play activity for years. A little airport, flying the toy plane, the tin plane, flying around, making the noise, crashing the plane. And then World War II came, and I am now I'm now 10 years. I was born in 1931, and I was 9. I was 9 years old. Then I got a haircut every week in Sugar House. And I'd get a haircut and then go to the Southeast Theater, which is right across the street. News magazines always, in reporting on the war, current events, would include frequently, ongoingly, airplanes. I would tear out the page with the airplane and would research the mission of the plane, the size of the plane, the efficiency of the plane, cut it out, and put it on my wall in the basement. And my dad had built a bedroom for me down there, a place where I did model airplanes, did hobby things. And all four walls, except for the entrance, the door, there was hardly a space. But there was not a cutout of an airplane of some kind. So my being a part of officers' training was dedicated to being a part of the Air Force. But when I graduated, at that point in time, the Korean War was winding down. They needed pilots, but they needed fewer pilots, and therefore qualification for pilot training did ask for a measure of real rigidity. I reported in to Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, and the examination to determine applicability to pilot training was fundamentally a very, very long mental, emotional examination a day, and then another day to determine unequivocally physical health, awareness, eyesight, hearing, strength, and the result, and what was interesting for me, in addition, they wanted to determine what we knew about aircraft, if anything. So they included another, an analysis, I don't know if it was an exam, but review of what we knew about aircraft. And when they would throw silhouettes of aircraft of all kinds from all different countries, I fundamentally knew them all. I knew them to such an extent they called me in for a special interview and said, "Lieutenant Brown, you're like a radar. We've never experienced anyone who's been able to identify aircraft like you have," and I shared with him the background for that. In that interview, there was enough enthusiasm for me at the time where the executive council that I was meeting with, they said, "We'd like to make an offer to you. You have a reserve commission. Normally, regular commissions are only given upon completion from a military school, like West Point, like Annapolis. But we'd like to offer you a regular commission at the completion of your pilot training in hopes that you would seriously consider the military as a career." That excited me. I felt good, complimented, and full of anticipation for the next step. There was always a period of time between being accepted into pilot training and in actual fact going into pilot training or becoming a part of the training process. They sent me to Williams Air Force Base in Chandler, Arizona. Williams Air Force Base was what they called a secondary school. So I was called to wait in the secondary school. And secondary, in pilot training, there's primary training, which then was a prop driven plane, the T-28, was called for trainers. And then secondary would be introduction to jets, which was then a T-33. And fundamentally, pilot training took 2 years. So I was stationed in the secondary school under Major Cochran, who was classic pilot in every sense of the word, had been a fighter pilot during World War II, and had, at the end of the war, left active duty. All he could think of was flying, became a crop duster, and recognized that what he wanted to do was to return to the Air Force. So he was accepted back in the Air Force, Major Cochran. Never had a boy, had 2 girls, and I became like his adopted son. And as a result of his influence and the relationship that I had, was able to be very actively involved with the with the training of officers who were in secondary school. So that was my first exposure to really experience jet travel, jet planes, and the incredible advance they represented between the historical P-51, P-40, P-38 range. I was waiting those orders from April until around the 1st of November. Quite a few months. None of those months would count towards my commitment of having to spend 2 years in training and 2 years after training on active duty. They were just holding pattern months. But I was called in by Major Cochran and the executive officer, indicating that there were, I think there were 8 of us that were going to receive our orders in a ceremony. We all had dress uniforms. It was a real evening of respect and celebration, and I was given my orders to report to Waco, Texas, for primary training, primary pilot training. I was very emotional. The executive officer reminded me of the opportunity that I had been given, and that my file included, of upon completion, I would receive a regular commission in the United States Air Force. That evening, as I left the celebration, I said so long, goodbye to my colleagues, my friends, my other fellow officers, and wanted to just walk alone. And so they went one direction to the BOQ, called Bachelor's Officers' Quarters. And I headed towards the entrance of Williams Air Force Base. And for some unaccountable reason, started to cry. Could not stop crying. Just cried. Then all I had to do as an officer was to the air. I forget the guard's name, what they were called. I forget. In any case, because I was full uniform, I asked if I could just walk off into the desert, and permission was given, and I did. And for almost the whole night, could only emotionally accept what I would call unadulterated confusion. And I determined, for the first time in my life, that I would go on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I had not thought of a mission ever. That wasn't a part. Missions then certainly were common. I was from a Mormon neighborhood. Most considered a mission. The kind of emphasis that is put on young men today, I was far less. At least I never felt pressure to indicate I was going to go on a mission. I wanted to go on a mission, nor really was there the expectation that I would go on a mission. All I know is that from a personal, individual standpoint, it had never entered my mind that I would go on a mission. It wasn't a goal. It wasn't a part of the planning that I had thought within myself. Came back, and I took off my dress uniform and awaited till officers would again convene at their headquarters next morning. I met Major Cochran, as we always did, where he enjoyed a cup of coffee, would talk to me about personal things, about assignments for the day, just share his influence, his interest in me. And I listened and then told him I'd like an appointment with the executive officer, with him there. And he said, "Oh, I think we can arrange that immediately, Alan," which he did within the hour. And I reported in front of the executive officer, a colonel, United States Air Force, wings with stars, all kinds of ribbons of recognition. I looked at Major Cochran, and I looked at Colonel, and I forget his name. And I pulled out my flight orders, and I tore them in half. And I said, I cannot accept these. And all I could do was just look at them and cry, and walked out. The next day, they called me back into the office and said, in all kinds of disbelief, because my enthusiasm to go and my refusal to go was a mystery, and certainly every element of confusing. But they said, Lieutenant Brown, we have a chance for you to finish out your active duty to go overseas. And we have two options where you could go. One is to England, and the other is to France. And the base you would be going to in France is called CAMA, Central Air Materiel Area, meaning it is the center of Air Force activity, protection in Central Europe. The base in France has, in actual fact, not been completed. It's more a huge, massive field of tents and roads under construction. But you have a choice. Immediately, I felt that I wanted to go to France and accepted the orders to report in, I think, maybe around, it was November, because my first day there was Thanksgiving. My first day was Thanksgiving of, lose track of years now, this is still 53, Thanksgiving of 53. I remember eating in the mess hall, just not knowing anything, having reported to France. I came through Frankfurt, Germany, and had taken a train from Frankfurt to Paris and to Châteauroux. The base was in a city called Châteauroux, which was directly south of Paris, just south of Orléans. That was my first day.